up from a trial deputy just like me. I was actually on the same grade 4 list as she was when she got her grade 4 way back when we were just youngins, I guess. And so she also endorsed you.
You know, Jackie's an amazing story. She grew up in Crenshaw. Her father actually was shot in his front yard by gang members. You know, she went to law school. She went right to the DA's office, was there over 30 years, held most positions in that DA's office until she finally became the first African-American woman to hold the position. Interestingly, Jackie is a Democrat. Steve Cooley's a Republican. Those U.S. attorneys are Democrats and Republicans. And a point that Jackie made, what I thought was a very important point for this election, she says it's not about politics. It's not about Democrats versus Republicans, because I know we got a very polarized society. We got a presidential election coming up. But she says the DA's election is unique. It's a nonpartisan race, so you're not going to see even party affiliation next to our names on the ballots. And it really is about who has the experience, who has the blueprint, who can keep you and your family safe for the next 4 years.
And that's why I thought it was so surprising to have Gascon run against Jackie 4 years ago, because she was an African-American woman who was progressive, and she was making changes. Apparently, it just wasn't fast enough for him. And so they brought in Gascon from San Francisco to, I guess, accelerate those changes, but they were being done already. And so when you say it's not politics, it's like there were 2 Democrats running against each other in that election, and it made, to me personally, no sense. Jackie was, I believe, this close to actually winning it in the primary when the Black Lives Matter showed up at her house at 4:30 in the morning, and her husband, who was the nicest man ever. I worked with him on a number of cases. He was a forensic auditor for the DA's office, and when I was in consumer protection, doing cases with hundreds of thousands of victims, and he helped analyze the evidence for me. So, and David went down and answered the door with a gun and ultimately was charged. And that's what I think ultimately kept her from being able to be reelected. And so now we've had this 4 years of this experiment, which has failed horribly. It's frustrating to see what has happened, but you give us hope that there is going to be a change.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You know, again, Jackie ran in a very unusual situation that summer, the summer of 2020. That was the George Floyd summer, the defund the police, the riots and protests in the streets. You know, and George Gascon comes in with promises, a lot of promises. I can fix all the problems in the LA criminal justice system, and I guarantee you that I can bring more safety to the streets rather than less. Well, he hasn't fixed the problems in the system, and he's basically taken our safety into the abyss. You know, the California Department of Justice just came out recently with the statistics of the violent crimes and property crimes and hate crimes over the last 4 years. They're all double digits with George Gascon. In fact, shoplifting was up 133%.
And yet he says that his policies are working to reduce it because crime is down.
Well, they are working for criminals. If you're a criminal right now, if you don't vote for George Gascon, wow, you are voting against your interest. Because he is, if anything, he's brought in the dawn of the golden age of criminals, which I hope to bring its sunset come November 5th.
It's going to be a process because it's going to take a while for the mindset of the criminals, I think, to get back to, hey, we can't do this, because I think they're thinking they can get away with it. And in fact, they brag about it.
100%. You know, we don't need to shoot for the 1960s or the 1970s for the target of safety that we're looking for. We only have to go back 10 years to 2014. 2014 was considered our safest year in the last 50 years. And what was going right? Well, you had a DA doing her job. That was Jackie Lacey. You had the police understand the DA's office was now their partner, so they were doing their job. You had victims know that if you dialed 911, someone would not only pick up the phone, but the DA's office and law enforcement would help bring justice to the harm you suffered. And as importantly, to your point, criminals understood that there were lines in the sand. Those lines were our laws. They were being consistently, fairly, and impartially enforced, but there were real consequences on the other side of the line. So in that year, a historic number for the last 50 years of criminals weren't committing crimes. Deterrence was working. And that is the true goal. That is the true test of an effective criminal justice system. Not how many people you can put in jail. It's how many people you can deter from committing the crimes in the first place, because that means there's a whole lot less victims in the system.
Yeah, it certainly is a different feeling on the streets now than there was in 2014. I still remember that time because I was, working downtown, and things were not near as bad as they are now, as far as even feeling safe walking to your car in a parking lot.
I was at an event about 2 weeks ago, and a woman comes up to me and she says, "Look, I'm 82. I used to walk around my neighborhood. I'm afraid. I don't walk around my neighborhood anymore." And she says, "I don't know how many more years I have, but you got to fix this. This is unacceptable." She can't leave. She's got everything invested in that house and all her friends, so she's not going anywhere. So she said, "You got to fix this. You got to win. You got to get rid of Gascon. You got to get LA County back on track." I said, "Ma'am, I will do everything in my power to make that happen." And so I'm literally running around this county getting the message out. November 5th is an incredibly important election. People, the recall didn't work against Gascon, but he's on the ballot now. If you want to make your voice heard, you need to vote, and vote for the DA's office. Hopefully when people hear about myself, they'll say, "Okay, that candidate makes sense. Nathan Hochman, I can vote for him and send a strong message to Gascon that now it's time to be gone."
One of the concerns I think that some people have is one of the reasons Gascon was elected is because there was a perception that the DA's office was covering up for cops, that we weren't going after bad cops, that we weren't going after shootings that were unjustified. I have something in common with you in that I also have prosecuted cops during the course of my career. I actually prosecuted cops that people in the division that prosecutes cops said there was no crime. I was like, "No, there is a crime." I prosecuted it, got the conviction on a couple of different officers. And I know you've done the same thing in your job within the Department of Justice.
If I become DA, I'll be the only DA that not only has set up a foundation to get resources to the sheriff's department and partner with law enforcement, but as you said, the only DA in history that has personally prosecuted a deputy sheriff. I did it back in the 1990s. I was part of a team that went after 16 deputy sheriffs who were stealing drugs, guns, and money from drug dealers.
Was that the Majors crew from that?
Majors.
I was in Major Narcotics at the time that was going on, and believe me, I saw the effect that had, and it was something that we do need to do as prosecutors. We need to make sure that those who are enforcing our laws are following those laws, and if they don't, we need to use the full force of our offices to go after them. And so,
100%.
You are not going to, they're not going to be able to paint you into a corner that you're going to cover up for cops, that you're going to allow bad shootings to go unpunished.
Not at all. I mean, I've made it crystal clear to every law enforcement person I've met with, up to the sheriff of LA County or the police chief of the LAPD, that if a police officer crosses the line, engages in criminal conduct, they will be treated like any other criminal and prosecuted for their actions. You know what they tell me, which is interesting? They said no one hates a bad cop more than a good cop, because they understand that bad cops ruin the reputation in the public's eyes for the entire department. And if they're not dealt with very swiftly, giving them full due process rights, full trials, whatever they want. But if they're not prosecuted, it sends a message that the people in charge of your safety now are allowed to run crazy and run amok. That can't happen. And so we will take a very firm stance against any law enforcement officer who crosses the line. But the overwhelming number of law enforcement officers, when those bullets are flying in the building, they're running into the building to keep us safe. Those officers deserve our respect, our admiration, and if I'm the DA, our partnership.
Yeah, it's something that as a prosecutor, I have to rely on my law enforcement partners to gather the evidence that I need to be able to present. So it really is somewhat of a partnership, but it's not a partnership that's a cover-up. And,
Absolutely.
and that is one of the things that I've seen, at least in my career, and I've tried to emulate, is that I don't let bad behavior go unpunished or unrewarded. So if there is that something crops up, it's incumbent upon all of us within the system to do what we can to rectify that.
100%. And swiftly. It can't be allowed. One of the problems with Gascon, interestingly, is he came into office saying that all those cases that supposedly Jackie Lacey, his predecessor, didn't prosecute against police officers, he was going to prosecute. Well, lo and behold, after 3.5 years, he's only prosecuted two people out of the dozens of people he said he was going to prosecute, because it turns out when he actually looked at the case and looked at the evidence wasn't there to establish the criminal violations that he assured everyone actually occurred.
And I think on one of the cases, wasn't it, it was dismissed because the prosecutor made some blunder or something?
Oh yeah, no, his implementation of his own agenda has been catastrophically incompetent. Literally, catastrophically incompetent. If I'm in charge, I will make sure that the prosecutors who are in charge of looking at police officer misconduct are the best that we can possibly put out there. They work swiftly, they work efficiently, they come up with results because victims are counting on them coming up with those results. The law enforcement officers themselves are in a limbo state. They don't know if they're going to be prosecuted or not prosecuted. We owe it to them as well to give them a decision in real time. Gascon has absolutely failed in that regard.
And one of the things you were talking about previously is his bringing public defenders over to the office and putting them in positions of power, and basically forcing out some really good people. It was interestingly, the office created a position of chief of staff where one did not exist previously. And he appointed an assistant district attorney, Vicki Adams, into that position. I think he used her as the bait to get that position, and shortly thereafter diminished all of her responsibilities and basically gave her nothing to do. She is one of the, I believe, 24 deputy DAs who have filed lawsuits for retaliation against my boss, an unheard of number. We occasionally do get lawsuits against people in the DA's office, generally not the DA himself. It's usually a manager for some type of harassment or something that wasn't caught. But we have cases against the DA directly, many of them, and some of them have resulted in $1 million verdicts against our office. That just goes to show you his lack of judgment, his lack of ability to put suitable people into suitable positions, and taking suitable people who are in suitable positions and putting them in unsuitable positions in order to punish them. One of those public defenders that he put in charge of a large section of our office has now been indicted by the Attorney General. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, again, you almost can't make this stuff up. In January of 2024, so that's almost 3.5 years after he came into office, he goes ahead and has the chance to elevate the number 3 person of the DA's office, the assistant DA, who will be in charge of ethics and integrity. He elevates a woman named Diana Turan, who had just recently come from the public defender's office. And what he knew at the time is that Diana Turan was in herself the target of a criminal investigation being conducted by the California Attorney General against her for illegally basically stealing confidential police information from the sheriff's department and bringing it over to the DA's office.
And those were officers' confidential personnel files, which are protected by law.
Correct.
And she took those in her capacity as someone who was investigating the sheriff's department, apparently.
Right.
She took and copied that protected data and then brought it to the DA's office and used it?
That's the allegation. And it's not just an allegation, it's 11 felony counts that the Attorney General himself brought against Diana Taran. It's never been done before. A senior member of the LA DA's office has never been charged with felony charges in the history of the DA's office. And it shows you, again, Gascon's catastrophic incompetence when it comes to running the office.